Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis, and thank you for joining this stream and trusting in my reporting, commentaries, and analysis regarding different geopolitical conflicts. But I myself, I also learn from other people. I also watch other experts, watch other podcasts, watch other people's commentaries, and see what they're saying. And sometimes I find that what they're saying makes some sense, right? Quite sense. And in some other cases, I disagree with them. But I'm very open to learning from different people, and especially those experts who are in the United States, despite my personal, I would say, drastic disagreement with the US foreign policy. But I do follow American experts, and especially those who are critical to the American foreign policy. And one of these American figures that I respect is the economist and academic figure Jeffrey Sachs. I know that Jeffrey didn't play the best, let's say, role or the constructive role during the era of Gorbachev, and some would say that he participated in the destruction of the Russian economy or the Soviet economy. But recently, and especially during the wars in Ukraine and Syria, he was outspoken about these conflicts, and he had an alternative point of view, which I now respect his opinion because it's mostly based on critical analysis and also calling for diplomacy. First time I encountered Jeffrey Sachs was on MSNBC. And back then, if you remember, he was dropping truth bombs on MSNBC regarding the war in Syria. It was in 2017 when Trump wanted to bomb Syria after the Khan Sheikhun alleged chemical attack, and Trump came out and called Assad an animal, and he even bombed a Sharat airbase back then. And Jeffrey Sachs was on MSNBC calling for diplomacy and said, this is our mistake. We started this war in Syria 7 or 6 years ago. We launched the regime change war operation. It was a covert operation called Timber Sycamore. And we have done enough damage to Syria and to the Syrian people. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the course of this war that the United States started in Syria, right? And since then, I follow Jeffrey Sachs. I'm sure many of you already know him. But today, I collected a few videos of Jeffrey Sachs. I want to play them with you and also make some comments and analysis on what he says and what he believes, and let's see if we agree with him or not. But first, let's play this video that goes back to 2017, as I mentioned, when Jeffrey was on MSNBC and dropping these truth bombs on about the war in Syria. Let's take a look.
How out of control this could escalate.
It's true. But I think we have to step back and not put this in partisan terms. This is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. And I remember the day on your show when President Obama said, Assad must go. And I looked at you and Joe and I said, how's he going to do that? Where's the policy for that?
Right.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually, it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is the Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out, like his instinct told him, by the way.
Before, yeah.
That was his instinct. Yeah. But then all the establishment, The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out. We've done enough damage, 7 years. And now we really risk a confrontation with Russia that is extraordinarily dangerous.
I think Trump didn't depend on his instinct when he said, we have made a mistake in Iraq, for example. There was no weapons of mass destruction. We should have never invaded Iraq. And then Trump also said that he wants to withdraw the troops from Syria. This was not his instinct. It was based on information. He knew that this was a covert operation launched by the CIA. And he knew what the administration of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton did to Syria. And he knew later when the other Secretary of State, John Kerry, was replaced, who replaced Hillary Clinton. And what have these people done to Syria? He knew what Joe Biden did to Syria. Those were all public information for him. I mean, although he's not part of the establishment, but those information is accessible for him. And he has also his contacts and his sources, right, within the establishment, let's say. So Trump knew that he has to withdraw from Syria. This was a mistake, and it has created a chaos in Syria. And the strategic interest of the United States is not to keep forces in Syria or to continue this regime change war in Syria. So he wanted to withdraw. But then, as Jeffrey Sachs mentioned, the permanent state, which is the Pentagon, the CIA, and the military-industrial complex, and all these industrialists in the United States were benefiting from the continuation of the war in Syria, and especially also now those who are looting the oil from Syria, right? They wanted for it to be continued, and they exerted a huge pressure on Trump. And as you remember, when I hosted the former senator from the Virginia, and also the former colonel on our channel, he mentioned this, that there was a huge pressure on Trump not to withdraw from Syria. And I think at the end, Trump also had to make his calculations whether he wants to stay in power or not. And if we put on a scale, if he wants to stay in power or challenge the establishment for Syria, he doesn't care about Syria, right? So he backtracked, he backed off, and he didn't withdraw these forces from Syria. But what Jeffrey Sachs here doesn't say, basically, that this, beside it was a mistake and all this stuff, and then he says, and the jihadists came into the scene. The jihadists didn't come to the scene as a result of, or one of the unintended results of the Barack Obama policy in Syria. No, this was the intended policy. It wasn't something that, okay, we wanted to do a regime change war in Syria and then the jihadists joined. What can we do about them? No, this was intended. Because from the beginning, I mean, let's go back a little bit in history. In the 80s, between 1979 and 1982, when the CIA again tried to overthrow the government in Syria, who were the people who were ready to carry arms and fight against the Syrian government, the secular Syrian government back then? And those who were the people who carried arms and waged terrorist attacks on civilians, on the government buildings. They did assassinations, car bombings, etc. It happened again for 3 years between 1979 and 1982. They were the Muslim Brotherhood. Though, and for anyone who knows these Islamist groups in the region, the Muslim Brotherhood, they had military and the political wings. The military were the fighting vanguard, called, and the type of terrorism that they conducted in the 80s was similar to ISIS and Nusra now. So since then, these people wanted to take revenge because Hafez al-Assad crushed their rebellion, and they were waiting for this moment. Do you think the CIA didn't know that? Of course they did. And willingly also they supported these jihadists, because in 2012, the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States, they warned Obama that the fighting force, or the strongest fighting force against Assad, are the Islamists. They are the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. And Obama knew that. He received the report on his desk telling him, bro, the ones fighting Assad are these groups. And he knew that. So Jeffrey Sachs he's correct in his analysis, but he's not saying the entire truth, which is the United States willingly supported the Islamists and not like it was one of the unintended consequences for this. One of the funny things that I did today, I never used, by the way, ChatGPT, but today I did, and I was like, okay, can you please tell me something about Jeffrey Sachs? What is his position on Ukraine? And ChatGPT actually answered me with this. Jeffrey Sachs is an American economist and academic who has written and spoken about a range of global issues, including the conflict in Ukraine. Sachs has been critical of the involvement of Western countries, particularly the United States, in the Ukraine war. In a 2015 opinion article for the Boston Globe, Sachs argued that the Ukrainian crisis was a result of both Russian and Western interference in the region, and that the United States was partly to blame for provoking the crisis through its support of the 2014 Ukrainian revolution, which was a coup d'etat. Sachs criticized the economic sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States and its allies, arguing that they were harmful to both the Russian and Ukrainian economies. In a 2019 interview with the Russian news agency TASS, Sachs expressed concern about the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine and called for negotiated settlement to the conflict. He criticized the Ukrainian government's military approach to resolving the conflict and called for greater diplomatic efforts to find a peaceful resolution. Overall, Sachs' views on the Ukraine war appear to be nuanced and focused on the need for a diplomatic resolution to the conflict rather than a military one. And this is why I respect Sachs. But before we continue this, what do you think about this ChatGPT thing? I was like typing my name. So who is Gevorg Almasyan? And it was like, wow. Like the definition was quite accurate. And then I typed, is Gevorg Almasyan a conspiracy theorist? Let's see what is the answer. And the answer was quite good. And they said, no, Gevorg is not considered a conspiracy theorist. It is critical for the foreign intervention in the Middle East, especially from the West. Is in support of the government in Syria against the terrorists and this stuff. So it was quite good. I was happy that because unlike other platforms, I was like fate that ChatGPT would be like Wikipedia, you know, like my name is not yet on Wikipedia, but I'm quite sure if one day when my name will be on Wikipedia, I will be a conspiracy theorist, far right, far left. I like combine all these slanders in one place, right? Because that's the way they speak about me. If you go to the people who disagree with me. But anyways, one of the videos that I want to show you of Jeffrey Sachs is when he explains why the war erupted in Ukraine. Because till now we're in February and it's going to be March 2023, and still there are really considerable number of people who do not know that the war started in 2014 after the CIA engineered coup d'etat. So there is no correlation in their minds that this was a consequence of previous actions that happened in 2014. There was a coup, and then the government came, which oppressed the Russian-speaking people. It was considered a far-right nationalist government, and they banned the Russian language, and they considered the Russians as an enemy. So these people, they also revolted against the government or rebelled against the government, and they formed battalions. Russia came and supported these groups against the Ukrainian government, and these rebels in the east. They call them separatists, call them whatever you want. Names are not the most important part now, but they declared independence. They did voting. It's called self-determination. So there was a referendum and they chose to be independent. And then in 2022, Russia accused Ukraine of becoming a de facto NATO country, of having biological laboratories, of forming neo-Nazi groups on its territory against the Russian-speaking people, and that Ukraine is also massing its forces to recapture Crimea and the Donbas region. So all this context is being missed, right? This is the people. There are lots of people, by the way, up until this moment, they think like, Putin woke up in the morning and I was like, "Yallah, let's attack on Ukraine today," because they paint him as a crazy maniac, that he's not, his decisions aren't based on reasonable reasons. Like just like Assad, they portray him as a maniac, as someone who's really crazy, so you can expect anything from him. But Jeffrey Sachs, he explains eloquently, in my opinion, this issue, why the war started in Ukraine. Let's watch it together.
Started February 2022. It started with the overthrow of a government trying to maintain neutrality. And the United States helped put in power extreme nationalists in Ukraine who broke the neutrality policy, demand membership as soon as possible, and welcomed billions of dollars of arms shipments from the United States starting in 2014. So this war, going into its 9th year, came from a direct collision between two nuclear superpowers. How stupid is this? I can't even use polite language because the people in the United States government that have provoked this, these neoconservatives who have been in power for more than 30 years, are putting the entire world in danger. And of course, the media is completely dominated by the US and UK, English language media, I should say. And it tells one story, the bravado US-led narrative. It doesn't tell any of the facts, gives none of the background. And by the way, the United States learned its tricks from Britain, which has certainly been the most violent country in history over the last 2.5 centuries, fighting in almost every place in the world. Now Britain can't manage anything. It can't even keep its clinics open anymore, but it still loves war as long as it's someone else's war. So Britain is the great propagandist of this war. And the English media tell the story. Putin invaded, no reason, no provocation, February 2022. It's all Russia's evil, without any background at all. And without the most basic point.
He's correct on this. You see the missing context in the media. It is increasing, it spreads ignorance among the people. And then the people would think that Putin woke up in the morning and he decided to invade Ukraine. And the question here is why the media is keeping the people ignorant. Because politically, you can first exert control over them. And secondly, you can convince them that this war is just. Like we have to send weapons to Ukraine, right? So it makes quite convenient for the media to repeat a narrative that is at least missing a context. And one of the things that he mentioned in this video, which is quite important, Lukashenko, when his name was Lukashenko, right? Yes, in 2014, not Poroshenko, Lukashenko, the guy who escaped because of the coup. He was not pro-Russian, but he was not also pro-EU or pro-the United States or pro-NATO. He was trying to find a balance because the country is quite divided and there are different regions and different opinions and different aspirations for the people. So there was a project by Lukashenko that do we join the EU or not? Do we strike cooperation deals with the EU or not? So there was a major agreement that the EU wanted to sign with Ukraine, which is an association agreement. By the way, the same agreement they tried to sign also with Syria in 2008, and in 2008 Syria said no. They backtracked again. We don't want to sign on this deal anymore. Although they negotiated it with the European Union for a long time, but then they said we don't want to sign on this deal. Ukraine did the same. The last moment, they said no, and Lukashenko said, I want to put this agreement, ask my people. I want to make a referendum and ask my people whether they want to join this association agreement with the EU or not. And apparently, the Western side, especially the Europeans and the Americans, probably they knew that there is a big division in the society, and they probably the outcome of the voting would not be in their interest. Therefore, they toppled him. And they toppled him by very aggressive and very radical far-right nationalistic, ultra-nationalistic groups. All these other people who were demonstrating in the streets peacefully, those they cannot overthrow a government. The ones who did the work underground, used violence, weapons, and attacked the government buildings, were the neo-Nazis, right? So they managed to remove the government in order to convert the country into a pro-NATO country, and they started doing so. So the Russians came and they said, okay, let's make a deal. The Minsk Agreement 1 and the Minsk Agreement 2, we keep Ukraine neutral but united. They keep Crimea for themselves. They keep the Donbas region for themselves. But there should be a referendum in the Donbas region so that we could have a certain level of autonomy for the Russian-speaking people. And Kiev signed on it. They signed on Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, but they never implemented these deals. And now Poroshenko was the president who signed on this, who came after Lukashenko. He said that he didn't want to implement this because it was just, was a piece of paper for him to buy time so that he receives more weapons from the Western countries so that he would prepare himself to attack on the Donbas region and on Crimea again. So, if we don't understand this context, we become like a sorry to say, but a 3 years old who doesn't understand anything about anything, right? And there are so many big adults, supposedly, who believe in the narrative of the establishment without any context and without any historical background. So that's why there are so many commentators nowadays online trying to fill the vacuum, and thankfully I'm one of them. And I'm very grateful for you guys for supporting my work. The last video was good. It received some more views. If you like this video, before we end, please also share it with your friends and on social media. Please support this channel to grow. I think we deserve to grow on this channel quite and become quite bigger. Fast forward 2022, we gave some political, historical background and context to the Ukraine war. There was a mysterious blast against the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And now we know that the United States did it, thanks to Seymour Hersh. But Jeffrey Sachs in October, the 5th of October, 2022, he was on, which channel is this? Is on Bloomberg. He said that he suspects that it's the United States behind this attack. And he was cut off when he was saying this. And he was like, what is your evidence about it, Mr. Sachs? What are you talking about? Like, they really, like, the journalists didn't even let him continue speaking about it. But he knows, because he was part, and still, like, he has lots of contacts in the establishment, lots of friends and colleagues and contacts. And we know the motive was the motive to destroy the Nord Stream, right? But take a look how this journalist treated him when he tried to make a point, which he proved to be correct since then, right?
They raise rates in the front end.
Well, Europe is in a very, very sharp economic downturn. The sharp decline of output and living standards also shows up as a rise in prices. But the main fact is that the European economy is getting hammered by this, by the sudden cutoff of energy. And now, to make it definitive, the Green Pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. This is
Jeff, we got to stop there. That's quite a statement as well. Why do you feel that was a U.S. action? What evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence that U.S. helicopters, military helicopters, were circling over this area. We also had the threats from the United States earlier in this year that one way or another, we are going to end Nord Stream. We also have a remarkable statement by Secretary Blinken last Friday in a press conference that he says, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a strange way to, it's a strange way to talk if you're worried about the piracy on international infrastructure of vital significance. So I know this runs counter to our narrative. You're not allowed to say these things in the West. But the fact of the matter is, all over the world, when I talk to people, they think the U.S. did it. Just to tell you, and by the way, even reporters on our papers that are involved tell me privately, yeah, well, of course, but it doesn't show up in our media.
Professor, I want to get into tit for tat about what did or did not happen with Nord Stream, because I don't have the evidence and we don't have a counterbalance to this.
They don't have the evidence. They always don't have the evidence when it's not convenient for them, but they always are conclusively sure when it comes to other issues. Oh, we know for sure that Assad gassed his own people. We know for sure that Putin did this. And we know for sure that Cuba is doing that. We know for sure that Venezuela is evil. We know for sure that China is doing this and that. Everything that is related to other countries is like, we are sure. The journalists are giving opinions. Journalists aren't supposed to give opinions. They're supposed to tell you information and tell you what happened about the events, and then you formulate your own opinions. But they're telling you opinions nowadays, right? And it's quite crazy the way they treat such people when you raise a different narrative that counters the mainstream narrative. And back then, in September, October 2022, every single mainstream media outlet, if you go, like, they were repeating all the time that Russia did it. They're telling you to, Russia attacked its own infrastructure. Although for Russia, let's be honest about it, the Nord Stream pipelines also gives Russia leverage over Europe. So the continuation of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 is in the interest of Russia. It is in the interest of Russia to sell gas to Europe and make economic profits and to have a greater leverage over Europe. And that was the plan of the Americans, and that's why they blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, because they wanted to deprive first Russia from this weapon, which can be used against Europe if Russia wants to use it as a weapon, which means to have a better leverage. And two, they wanted to cut this Russian-German economic integration, because nothing threatens the American supremacy in Eurasia other than Russian natural resources, manpower, and the German technology and industry. So if both countries come together and they create a prosperous Eurasia, none of these countries first would need the United States economically, and most importantly on a security level. So that's the reason. And this was quite clear in also Seymour Hersh's investigation why the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. But this is not the only time that Jeffrey Sachs was interrupted by a journalist or a moderator. I find you another video, which is also, it's a recent one from October 2022. He was again mentioning that the UK and the US are the most violent countries. In the 19th century, he says the most violent country in the 19th century was Great Britain, and in the current time is the United States. And he raises an important, in my opinion, point here when he says, you can be democratic at home, but you can be very violent abroad. Let's take a look.
The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's
Jeff,
been by
let's,
far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait a
now.
minute, more
Let's,
wars. For one
Jeffrey,
moment,
I'm Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done.
Imagine there is a moderator telling a person like Jeffrey Sachs, enough, stop talking. This was enough because he's dropping truth bombs. Who was the dominant imperial power in the 19th century? It's Great Britain. And Great Britain has colonized half the world. They have murdered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people all around the world. They traveled all around the world to colonize the world. Like, if we start talking about British colonialism, we could never stop talking. Like, we could make a podcast, like we can start speaking now and not finish till I die, when I'm 80 or 90 years old. There are like pages and pages and pages and pages of documents on the British vile imperialism. I mean, other powers also were imperial powers. Like Germany, for example, was also an imperial power in Africa and some of the places, but they weren't as vile and violent as the Brits. Maybe I'm wrong. Please let me know. But because I have read some history about the German colonialism in Africa, and I found out that, like, yes, they have occupied these countries, but they weren't treating the people like the Brits used to do. One of the interesting aspects of the investigation in regards to the Nord Stream blast is that Sweden, which is one of the players that is investigating this Nord Stream blast, they conducted an investigation and they came with conclusions, but they don't want to share the conclusions with the public. They don't want to share the conclusions with the German side. Maybe they shared it, but they say we don't want to share it. And they don't want to share it with the media. They don't want to share it at all, which makes you question. And to be honest with you, if this Swedish intelligence found out that it was Russia who did it, I mean, they would have come out with all the evidence, and even if there was like a quarter of an evidence, right? Even if they found probably a nail of a Russian person in the sea or something, they would have used it as an evidence. But since they want to hide this from the public, it makes you question, what are they hiding from the public, right? So have they even investigated it, or they probably went to the waters to hide the evidence, to clean up the evidence? Those are legitimate questions. And why would Sweden do that? It's crazy what's happening in this case of the Nord Stream pipelines. And the crazier part is Germany, which is not saying anything in this regard. The official position of Germany, they're not saying anything in this regard. And it is their infrastructure, it is their economy, it is their everything, it's something that caused a huge impact on the German economy, on the livelihood here, the inflation, the taxation, the investment environment. Like it is a game-changing event, and we're not seeing insistence from the German side to share this the outcome of the investigations. But here, Jeffrey Sachs, he talks about this. Sweden. What did Sweden do in this regard? Let's take a look.
Why don't we ask Sweden? Very interesting case. Sweden sent its divers down. And you know what Sweden said at the end of its, quote, investigation? Well, this is so sensitive national security. We're not going to tell our public. We're not going to tell the Swedish parliament. We're not going to tell the Germans. We're not going to tell Denmark. What did they find? You think they're hiding that Russia did it? I'm sorry to tell you, they're not hiding that Russia did it. What they did was clean up the crime scene. Now, come on. Let's be clear. What is Sweden hiding from us? Or why don't we ask Sweden?
What is Sweden hiding from us? This is the question mark. And is there any journalists in Sweden asking this question, or are they also busy blaming Russia for blowing up its own infrastructure? Because if we put the investigation aside, have you seen any mainstream journalist calling for the release of this investigation? Like, is there really an article like that? Because in English, I didn't find. If you know, maybe in other languages, post it in the comments. I haven't seen a journalist, a respected journalist in the mainstream media is asking this question, where is the investigation? What happened to the investigation? But I have seen a lot of journalists blaming Russia for blowing up its own pipeline. And there are countless of videos. And the other day I watched the video. It's like a compilation, we call it. It's like they bring from all different channels when they're blaming Russia for blowing up the pipeline with so much confidence, you know. It's we are living in dark times when it comes to journalism and these journalists. I have been saying this for a very long time. But according to Sachs, he says that because he has, as I mentioned, contacts with lots of journalists, he has contacts in the administration, in the Pentagon, in the CIA. But when he speaks to journalists, senior journalists in major American outlets, newspapers, and when they speak about the Nord Stream, they all tell him the same. It's like, I mean, we know that the Americans did it, right? But we cannot say that to the public. Come on, Jeffrey. You know this attitude. Come on. We cannot say it to the public, but we know who did it. And we know who has the motive. And now we know the evidence after Seymour Hersh's article. And another investigative article is going to be dropped soon too, as per Seymour Hersh. He said that. But here he's mentioning this, and he says that he speaks to a senior journalist, and probably is very well known, and he's telling him, like, of course we know who did it. Let's take a look.
Policy. Now, the Swedes went in to clean up the debris. And what did the Swedes say? We cannot share our findings with Germany because of national security. Can you figure that one out? I can. But it's incredible. How could Sweden not share its findings with Germany and Denmark? But their job was to clean up the debris so that nobody else could investigate either. And they've done that. Now, the press, in this most remarkable act of vandalism on a key piece of international infrastructure, has not said a word in 8 weeks. Why? It's unimportant? Not one reporter is curious? When I spoke to a leading reporter of one of our leading papers, a paper that says every day that Russia did it, most likely, and I said to this leading reporter, whom I've known for 40 years, I think the U.S. did it. He said, of course the U.S. did it. I said, well, why doesn't your paper say so? And he said, well, you know, the editors, we don't really have the proof, but yeah, of course, who else would have done it? That's what he said. And then I showed him, but your paper said today that senior U.S. officials point to Russia as the likely agent of this destruction. Yeah, Jeff, you know, it's hard, it's complicated. I said, when I was young, I used to read your newspaper because you went after Nixon and Watergate and because you published the Pentagon Papers and so forth. He said, yes.
I mean, it's not very difficult to speak about this case if you want to, but it will be very difficult for you to keep your job. And it will be very difficult for you to sustain your job. And it will be very difficult to preserve your reputation, the supposed reputation, of course, because who creates reputation and who says that you are a reputable journalist or you're not? It's the mainstream media. And the mainstream media, if they smear a journalist, or first of all, he will be kicked out from his job. Secondly, they will smear him and they will call him names. And thirdly, he will never find a job again. That's why a person like Seymour Hersh, he writes in Substack. He writes in a blog, in a Substack, because if he submits this investigation to the New York Times or Washington Post or any other, let's say, newspaper in the United States, they're not going to publish it. So, of course, Jeffrey Sachs is correct on this, and he knows that these journalists, they know the truth, but they cannot say it. I mean, most people nowadays, I mean, they prefer to keep their jobs and not be jobless and just continue in their prestigious senior positions, especially if you're a journalist and you're making good money, because these people take care about money, they care about keeping their family intact, they care about the flow of money in their bank accounts. But if you want to be a brave journalist, you have to go then to Substack and you have to beg your followers to maybe subscribe and or go on YouTube and try to make a career out of it. It's very hard. And then YouTube comes and deplatforms you or shadow bans you and all this stuff, right? It's difficult if you want to be a political commentator or a journalist outside of these mainstream outlets. It's a very difficult job to do, I can assure you. I myself, I consider myself a political commentator, which I am always critical to the mainstream narratives. And my life is quite hard because of this. So it's not easy, let's say, to make a career and build a reputation and a trust among the audience. And I always always grateful and thankful for you guys for trusting me. That's why we have Syriana analysis since 2017. And if you really want to support my work, I really would kindly ask you to share this video and ask your friends also to subscribe to my channel. I would really love to have a bigger platform and a bigger voice, and also bring the voices of the people, because it's not only my voice. I also listen to the people, especially the oppressed people, and I deliver their pain and their stories on Syriana analysis. Now, the last video that I would like to show you for Sachs is he is endorsing Seymour Hersh's investigation. And he says only a handful of countries have the technical capacity and access to the Baltic Sea. So the thing here is, it's not only about who did it, but who had the capacity to do such an attack. So we have a handful of countries who has an access to the Baltic Sea and these technicalities to conduct such an attack. The United States, Great Britain, probably Denmark, Sweden, and Russia. And I don't find like other options. I'm sure Ukraine doesn't have the capacity for that. So one of these countries did it. Who has the most motive? I would say the United States and Great Britain. Those are the two countries who have the biggest motive to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines. So here, Jeffrey Sachs is talking to the UN Security Council the other day, and he even called the attack a terrorist attack. But we will not see it in this video, but he mentioned this. Let's take a look.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Sachs. There is only one detailed account to date of the Nord Stream destruction, the one recently put forward by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, ostensibly based on information leaked by Hersh by an unnamed source. Hersh attributes the Nord Stream destruction to a decision ordered by U.S. President Joe Biden and carried out by U.S. agents in a covert operation that Hersh describes in detail. The White House has described Hersh's account as, quote, completely and utterly false, unquote, but did not offer any information contradicting Hersh's account and did not offer any alternative explanation. Only a handful of state-level actors have both the technical capacity and access to the Baltic Sea to have carried out this action. Include the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, Poland, Norway, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden, either individually or in some combination. Ukraine lacks the necessary technologies as well as access to the Baltic Sea. A recent report by the Washington Post revealed that the intelligence agencies of the NATO countries have privately concluded that there is no evidence whatsoever that Russia carried out this action.
So we have a conclusive report that says there is no evidence, and this is coming from the United States, that Russia did it. So if Russia didn't do it, who did it? Germany didn't do it, right? To itself again. And I truly rule out that the Swedes did it. So we have now the Seymour Hersh report that says it was cooperation between Denmark and the United States. Okay. Let's suppose Seymour Hersh made a mistake and his sources were not 100% accurate and he misreported. And it happens, right? All investigative journalists and also normal journalists do mistakes. I do mistakes. So when there is a counter argument or a counter evidence to the Seymour Hersh's article, then we can discuss about that. But he published this almost 2 weeks ago. Until now, the United States, the deep state, the Pentagon, the CIA, they couldn't cover up this investigation. They couldn't publish another investigation that negates or counters the investigation of Seymour Hersh. So this makes you also question if there is another argument or another investigation that is published. I will show it. I will come also to Syriana analysis and tell you about it. But up until this moment, there is none, which also gives me the conviction that there will be none, because they were able to create evidence, their own evidence, in 2 days. But this is the evidence that Seymour Hersh is presenting, thanks to his sources, is too damning, right? And it's also so much convincing. This is the problem. The main problem in these narrative wars or the information warfare is the ability of the people in the non-mainstream or in the alternative media, or people who do not belong to the mainstream media outlets. They're able to convince, and they sound more convincing. And this doesn't stop in the Ukraine war. It's also in the Syrian war, in the Iraq war, during Corona, the pandemic. They sound more convincing, more logical. Even if they're wrong, but they sound more logical. That's the problem. And also there is a track record of scandals, the big fat lies that were caught, like during the second Gulf War, when the United States bombed Iraq, and they said Iraqi army is throwing the babies from the windows, which was proven to be complete fat lie. And then the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, again proven to be big fat lie. Again later in Libya, they said Gaddafi is giving Viagra to his soldiers to use rape as a weapon. It was proven to be big fat lie. And then in Syria, they lied for 12 years. We have caught them lying big time, right? So there is a track record for that. And the people can accumulate this in their subconscious and be always alarmed and cautious for everything they hear. And I'm not talking about all the people, but there are increasing number of people who doubt. Like if you go back in 2001, for example, and 2002 or 2003, the number of people would be less doubting the narratives. But now it's becoming more and more. And the weapon that they wanted to use, the social media, against the people now are able to use these social media platforms against the establishment. And one of the platforms that I'm liking the most nowadays is Twitter, and I'm not receiving any strikes or any suppression there. My followers are increasing on Twitter. So if you want to follow me, guys, Kevork Almasian on Twitter, I would be really be glad if you follow me also on Twitter. I post lots of reporting tweets from Syria and elsewhere there. Also short analysis, but mostly the longer analysis, commentaries, and videos I'm posting on YouTube, just like this one. And I hope you like this video. If you did, please subscribe and hit the like button and share it with your friends and on your platforms. And I'm really helpful and grateful, guys, for all your support. And as I mentioned, I think I deserve to have a bigger platform, and I'm sure that you also mostly probably agree with me. If you do, please recommend to your friends to follow my work. And finally, if you want to support my independent commentary work on YouTube like this, you can become a patron The link is in the description. It's a really great help for me, guys. Thank you so much, and see you soon.